I'm your host, Tim Lyons, from Running Through the Jungle with Dey Weekly, episode 10. I'll provide a quick recap from week 10 of the Bengals game. And for all you fantasy football enthusiasts, I'll also cover the top 5 point getters from this week. Now to week 10 versus the Ravens. The Cincinnati Bengals faced off against the Baltimore Ravens in a thrilling Thursday night football game on November 7th, 2024, last Thursday. The Ravens pulled off a dramatic 35-34 victory. Here are some key moments from the game. Joe Burrow had an impressive performance, throwing for 428 yards and 4 touchdowns. He connected with Jamar Chase for 3 of those touchdowns, including a 70-yard bomb in the second half. Lamar Jackson led a remarkable comeback for the Ravens, throwing 3 fourth-quarter touchdown passes. His final touchdown pass to Bateman with 1 minute and 49 seconds left gave the Ravens a 7-point lead. The Bengals attempted a 2-point conversion to tie the game, but Burrow's pass to Tanner Hudson fell incomplete. Wallace made a crucial 84-yard touchdown catch for the Ravens, barely staying in bounds. The game was a back-and-forth battle, with the Ravens erasing a 14-point deficit in the second half. It was a heartbreaker for the Bengals, who fell to 4-6 on the season. Now, next up for the Cincinnati Bengals, on Sunday Night Football versus the Los Angeles Chargers. Now, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with your friends. If you want to hear our reactions to the games, check out Roaring Reactions on YouTube or listen to us on all your podcast platforms weekly. Also, join us on Wednesdays for our Running Through the Jungle's predictions. And also, make sure that you check us out on the podcast, all the podcast platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and etc. Now I'm going to take a quick commercial break, and I'll be right back with you. Welcome back. Now, to start the episode, or the rest of the episode, I'm going to go over the fantasy football 5 leaders for each position for fantasy football. But I'm going to start with like I did last week, I'm going to start with the perfect lineup. And this is brought to you by NFL Fantasy Football. The perfect lineup: Joe Burrow for the Cincinnati Bengals had 33.72 points. Robinson for the Atlanta Falcons had 29.4 points. Hubbard for Carolina Panthers had 24.9 points. Jamar Chase had 55.4 points. Holy cow. Valdez-Scantling for the New Orleans Saints had 25.9 points. Travis Kelce for Kansas City had 20.4 points. Calvin Ridley for the Tennessee Titans had 25.4 points. Cardi for the Los Angeles Rams had 19 points. And for the defense, the Philadelphia Eagles with 20 points. If you had that perfect lineup, you would have had a 254.12 points. Now to the I'm not so perfect lineup. If you're running Aaron Rodgers, he only had 4.04 points. Mason for the 49ers had 0.5 points. Williams for the Denver Broncos only had 2.7 points. Deontay Johnson for the Baltimore Ravens only had 1.6 points. Xavier Worthy only had 2.1 points. Hunter Henry had 2.4 points. Thomas Jr. for the Jacksonville Jaguars had 3.2 points. Justin Tucker only had 3 points. And then our own Cincinnati Bengals had negative 4 points. And with the total of 15.54 points for the I'm not so perfect lineup. Now brought to you by NFL Fantasy Football. I'm going to start with the quarterbacks. Joe Burrow versus Baltimore at number 1. Had 428 yards, 4 touchdowns, 6 yards rushing for 33.72 points. Lamar Jackson versus Cincinnati had 290 passing yards, 4 touchdowns, 33 rushing yards, and 1 2-point conversion for 32.90 points. Jalen Hurts versus Dallas had 202 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception for 56 yards rushing and 2 touchdowns and 1 fumble loss for 29.68 points. Kyler Murray versus the New York Jets had 266 yards and 1 touchdown. He had 21 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns for 28.74 points. Brock Purdy comes in at number 5 versus Tampa Bay, had 353 points, 2 touchdowns, 17 rushing yards, and 23.82 points. Now to the bell cows, the running backs. Bijan Robinson at number 1 versus New Orleans Saints had 116 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns, 3 receptions for 28 yards, and had 29.40 points. Chuba Hubbard versus New York Giants had 153 yards rushing, 1 touchdown, 4 receptions for 16 yards, a lost fumble, and had 24.90 points. Chase Brown versus Baltimore at number 3 had 42 rushing yards and 1 touchdown. He had 9 receptions for 52 yards and 1 lost fumble for 22.40 points. James Conner versus the New York Jets had 33 rushing yards and 1 touchdown. He had 5 receptions for 80 yards for 22.30 points. Rashad White versus San Francisco had 31 rushing yards, had 6 receptions for 39 yards and 1 touchdown, had 19 points. Now to your wide receivers. Let's see here. Wide receivers, Jamar Chase versus Baltimore had 11 receptions, 264 yards, and 3 touchdowns for 55.40 points. Like I said on our Roaring Reactions, that Jamar Chase is the greatest wide receiver in the league right now. Marquez Van Valdez Scantling versus Atlanta had 3 receptions for 109 yards, 2 touchdowns for 25.90 points. Calvin Ridley versus the Los Angeles Chargers had 5 receptions for 84 yards and 2 touchdowns for 25.40 points. George Pickens versus Washington had 4 rushing yards. He had 5 receptions for 91 yards and 1 touchdown for 20.50 points. Tylan Wallace versus Cincinnati had 3 receptions, 115 yards, and 1 touchdown, and had 20.50 points. And thankfully for him, the Cincinnati Bengals defense cannot tackle. Now to the tight ends. Travis Kelce at number 1 versus Denver had 8 receptions for 64 yards and 1 touchdown for 20.40 points. Mark Andrews versus Cincinnati had 6 receptions for 68 yards and 1 touchdown for 18.80 points. Tanner Hudson for Cincinnati versus Baltimore had 1 rushing yard. He had 6 receptions for 42 yards and 1 touchdown for 16.30 points. Sam Laporta versus Houston had 3 receptions for 66 yards and 1 touchdown for 15.60 points. TJ Hawkinson versus the Jacksonville Jaguars had 8 receptions for 72 yards for 15.20 points. Now to the kickers. Let's see here. Joshua Carty at number 1 versus Miami had made 5 field goals, 2 for 50-plus yards for 19 points. Jason Sanders for Miami versus the Los Angeles Rams had 2 PATs and 3 field goals. 2 field goals were from 50-plus yards for 15 points. Fairbairn versus Detroit had 2 PATs and 3 field goals, 1 for 50-plus yards for 13 points. Joey Sly versus Chicago had 1 PAT and 4 field goals for 13 points. Tyler Bass versus the Indianapolis Colts had 3 PATs and 3 field goals made for 12 points. Now to the defense. The Philadelphia Eagles versus Dallas had 3 sacks, 1 interception, and 4 fumble recoveries. Only allowed 6 points for 20 points. 20 fantasy points, that is. The Buffalo Bills versus the Indianapolis Colts had 4 sacks, 3 interceptions, 1 fumble recovery. They scored a defensive touchdown for only allowed 20 points, but they had scored 19 fantasy points. The New England Patriots versus Chicago sacked them 9 times. Holy cow. Only allowed 3 points and had 16 fantasy points. The Minnesota Vikings versus Jacksonville had 3 sacks, 2 interceptions, and 1 fumble recovery, allowed 7 points, and had 13 fantasy points. Arizona Cardinals versus the New York Jets, 3 sacks, 1 fumble recovery, allowed only 6 points and had a total of 12 fantasy points. Now, top 3 waiver wires. At number 1, Justin Herbert. He was only rostered for 56.7% of leagues. Last week, he had 164 yards passing, 1 touchdown, 32 rushing yards, and 1 touchdown for 19.76 fantasy points. It's a possibility you might want to pick him up if you need a better quarterback than Aaron Rodgers. At number 3, Jalen Warren for the Pittsburgh Steelers. He's only rostered in 40.9% of fantasy leagues. Last week, he had 66 rushing yards, 2 receptions for 29 yards. He did lose a fumble, but he only had 19.50 points. He could be a possibility to, kind of have him as a flex guy or maybe, running back 2. He could be promising. Could see a little bit more action for him in the weeks to come. And at number 3 for week getters is Russell Wilson. Only rostered for 11.5% of leagues. Russell Wilson last week had 195 yards, 3 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, and he had 3 rushing yards, but he still had 18.10 points. But if you look at, what he's done for the weeks before that, he's at this first week back versus the Jets, he had 24.86 points. So, like I said, if you're looking for somebody to replace Aaron Rodgers, look at Justin Herbert or Russell Wilson. And that is it for the Who Dey Weekly. Thank you guys so much for watching and listening. Please remember to like, subscribe, rate, review, and share with your friends. You can catch us on YouTube. And then you can also catch us on all your podcast platforms. Thank you guys so much. And I hope you enjoyed this quick Who Dey Weekly from Running Through the Jungle. I'm your host, Tim Lyons. Have a great day. Who Dey.